Thank you so much for offering to participate in this interview. This is an interview conducted by myself, Emma Cieslik, on Saturday, February 20th at 10 o'clock in the morning for the Muncie LGBTQ History Project. I use she, her pronouns. We are recording via Zoom while I sit in the Burkhart Building at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. I wanted to sincerely thank you for your time and for your contribution to the Muncie LGBTQ History Project. Starting off, would you mind please introducing yourself?
My name is Buddie Jones. I am currently working as a training instructor with a company called Maximus that's in charge of the Indiana COVID-19 contact tracing, as well as the vaccination helpline.
That's wonderful. Thank you for all of your important work right now.
Thank you. You're welcome.
What pronouns do you use?
She, her.
Wonderful. Would you mind please sharing your age?
I'm 47.
Wonderful. And I'm curious, going along with that, when and where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in a variety of places. I lived in, I think it's 11 states before I was 5 years old. But mostly I grew up in Ohio, Michigan, and here in Muncie.
I'm curious, what brought you to the 11 states growing up and led you to move so often?
Um, my mother was sort of a gypsy. And the only reason we settled down is because I had to start school. So
That's very exciting. And I'm curious, where did you grow up? I know you mentioned in Michigan and Ohio and that region as well. Was there any specific place where you spent your schooling years?
I spent most of my schooling years in Union City, Ohio, which is not far from Muncie, maybe 35 miles, something like that.
Wonderful. And I'm curious, I know you mentioned your mother. Would you mind telling me more about your family?
Um, let's see. My immediate family consists of my mother, my brother, and myself. Um, my parents divorced when I was very young, so I have some half siblings and step siblings that I'm not really very familiar with. We don't know each other very well. Um, and then I raised my own family, so I have 5 children of my own. The youngest one just turned 21 in October, and my oldest is 32.
That's very exciting. And I'm curious, are there any particular relationships that have really shaped your life in important ways?
Oh my. Um, hmm. There's many relationships that have shaped my life in really important ways. I think that addressing the topic at hand,
Yes.
being transgender, um, my grandparents, now they may not have used the language, but mostly due to their age, but my grandparents were transgender. And so in saying that, my relationship with my mother was not an, I was never out to her until about 2.5 years ago. But m- my mother was very accepting of my participation in stereotypically feminine activities. So I was never, unlike a lot of male assigned children, especially at my age, my generation, so many male assigned children, it's not wasn't acceptable to cook or to want to go, dancing and things like that. And I have my own furry friends running around my house right now. So if you hear me snap my fingers, it's because I'm trying to get one in line. She's used to it. I have Zoom meetings every day. So okay, I think she's calmed down a little bit. So I was always able to, you know, be able to participate in those things without judgment. Um, so I think that, the relationship with my grandparents made it okay for me to be who I was. And although I wasn't out to my mother per se, doing those things that were feminine were always fine. She never like once um she never once like chastised me for wanting to do those types of things or participate in those types of activities.
Yes. And I'm curious, going along with that, would you mind saying more about what it meant for them to be transgender for your grandparents?
Mm, well, I think using the language of their generation, they identified as gay and lesbian. Um, but knowing who they were and knowing what their life was like, not in the public eye, they were definitely transgender. I've often said throughout my life that my grandfather was the strongest man and woman I've ever met. So my grandmother was she was a stereotypical boy. I mean, very quiet, very reserved, westerns on television. Um, I tell the story a lot about introducing my grandmother to a good high school friend and leaving my house, and that high school friend saying, "You said that was your grandma, right?" And I said, "Yeah, no, that was your grandpa." No, it was my grandmother.
And I'm curious, were they married to each other?
They were married for 52 years. So
And I'm
yes,
and I'm curious, where did they live? Did they travel as well, or were they living in a specific spot?
they lived my entire life. They lived in Dark County, Ohio.
Wonderful. And I was curious, I was fascinated by their story as well. What were their experiences in the community? Were they out to the community?
Um, I think that I don't think that there was ever any hiding my grandmother's masculinity or my grandfather's femininity. That was not something that they could easily disguise. Um, and because it's just who they were. Um, I think that the definition of out is kind of ambiguous in this sense. Um, because they couldn't hide the fact that my grandmother was very masculine, my grandfather was very feminine. Um, and to be just quite frank, they dated people of their even through their marriage, they dated people of the same biological sex. Uh, so I guess in a sense they were out, and in another way they were completely closeted because they lived a heteronormative life. They were married to each other. They lived in the same home. They took care of each other. Um, and I actually have a presentation that I give about my grandparents because, especially my grandfather, they meant so much to me and who I am today. And um, as a transgender person, as a male to female transgender person, so much of what I do could still be considered very masculine. Um, and on the other hand, I want to do it in a pretty dress. So my grandfather made it really okay for me to be that person. Um, so I think, yeah, I think that in a way, I don't think anyone that knew them was not aware of who they were. But on the other hand, I think because they were born, in the 1920s and came of age, during World War II, I think in a way they had to be completely closeted at the same time. Like they went to church as a couple, they raised children as a couple. Um, so, like I said, I think the term out is a little ambiguous. So, because in a sense, like the family we all knew, I remember pulling up to my grandfather's house when I was very small, and my grandfather was about the age I am now, and him climbing down off of a ladder in a tube top and cut off shorts because he'd been painting the house. And, at the same time, he went fishing every day. He hunted. Um, and I do use he and she, he pronouns for my grandfather and she because they would not have identified transgender. I'm not sure they were equipped with the language to identify that way. And if I get really close to the camera, I'm still having coffee this morning.
Oh, no worries. I'm definitely the same way. I know it's a Saturday morning. And I'm really curious, how did they meet each other?
Okay, so I'm not sure everyone gets this kind of information about their grandparents. So, um, my mother's biological mother was also transgender. I don't call her my grandmother though. She was a very, very mean person. So, and she was really mean to me. And I think it's because I was feminine and she, for whatever reason, maybe it's because she wasn't happy with herself. I'm not sure. I haven't really analyzed that relationship. I didn't see her for about 13 or 14 years before she passed. Um, so she and the person that I call my grandmother, which would have been my step grandmother, they were a couple. They were lovers. And um, my step grandmother and she had a falling out. And my step grandmother started dating my grandfather solely for the purpose of having children. She wanted more children. So they got married for that reason. Now that being said, it all sounds like okay. So it's in today people do those things and it's completely platonic and they have the baby and it's over and I did not realize this about my grandparents until they were old and my grandmother was had dementia. How much in love with each other they were, and I realized that relationship was completely not based on sex in any way. They loved each other. They they doted heavily on each other. So I think that could you repeat your question? Because I may have I lost your question.
Yes. No, that was perfect. I was curious how they met each other and how they found each other.
That was how they my grandmother and my grandfather were married. My grandmother had this her for lack of a better term in their world, she had a lesbian lover. They split up and her lesbian lover started dating my grandfather and they got married in 1952.
Wonderful. And I'm curious, I know that your mother would be related to her through that relationship. Did your grandmother, who you identify as your grandmother, adopt your mother?
No, there was never any formal adoption. Um, and that is a whole other ball of wax there. My mother had to get she went through a lot with her biological mother and was a ward of the state and did not actually meet my grandfather and my grandmother until she was 10 years old. So there was never any adoption, but um, I'll say this: my mother called her biological mother by her given first name. She called my step grandmother mom.
Yes. And I was curious, were there a community of people like them where they lived in Ohio?
Oh no, 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 not at all. That community, not that obviously, not that people, like them, um, didn't exist in that community, but it's not something you talk about in a community like that. I think the entire county only has about 40,000 people, maybe. I think I might be stretching that. Um, and they lived about 14 miles from the nearest, major community. And I think they did that because of who they were. They were able to maintain some anonymity and privacy, being that far out in the county, and they were self-sufficient farmers. I learned so much after my grandparents died, just analyzing who they were and knowing what I know about the LGBTQ community, as well as socioeconomics. So, although they were very poor, but I think it's because they were members of the LGBTQ community. I think they were relegated to that place in life early in their lives and maintained it. They just my grandfather died about 11 years ago. So
I'm very sorry. And I was curious, going along with that, did they, and I know you mentioned that they were part of a different socioeconomic class because of that identity. Did they face any animosity or discrimination in the community? I know you mentioned that it was widely known, but it was different, a different understanding of being out.
um, I know for my grandfather worked in a factory that manufactured Chevrolet trucks, and because he was gay or identified as a gay male and was the most feminine person I've ever met in my life. um, he definitely was never promoted. He was never allowed out. He was in shipping and receiving, and was never allowed to do anything but that. He got sick when in his early 50s, and rather than and I know that there were other people with similar issues at the same time that were not that didn't identify as gay, that were promoted and kept in their job. My grandfather got sick and they sort of forced him into retirement at in his early 50s. I don't remember the exact age, but he was in his early 50s. So yeah, he definitely was oppressed for being who he was.
Yes. And I'm curious, going along with that, I know they played a very important role in your life. Would you mind sharing more about your family now?
Do you elaborate on what you're asking?
I'm curious about the people that play an important role in your life now. And it can be people that have played an important role for a long time, but who you consider your family right now.
Okay. So I would say the most important members of my family at this point in my life would probably be my sons. Um, when I came out in October of 2018, I was sort of forced out by a friend that I came out to, and then they got angry with me and like, well, I'm just going to tell your family. So rather than letting that person do that to me, um, my oldest son is 23 now. Um, but rather than letting that person try to hurt me, I told my son, I need to have a talk with you. And I told him, I was very blunt about it. I've got to tell you this thing. This is what. And he sat there for a minute and he just looked at me and he said, "You're still my dad. And I think you're the bravest person I know." And he doesn't know it. I'm not sure if he can hear me, if he's awake yet today, but he's my hero. There's been times or I've had to put myself in some uncomfortable situations, some situations where I knew that the environment may not be the safest environment. And I'm 5'3". I'm not a very big person, so there's been some times where I've felt very intimidated. My son's 6'2" and weighs almost 300 pounds. He doesn't let anybody bother me. He's always stands up for me. I'm sorry that. Oh,
No,
anyway,
don't be sorry at all. It's always important to have wonderful people in our lives who celebrate who we are and are there to protect that.
thank you.
And I'm curious going along with that. I know you mentioned that you came out to your son as well. Did you come out to your broader family? Were your grandparents aware of how you identify?
My grandmother definitely did not. You know, especially as we start getting older, we start evaluating these relationships that we've had throughout our lives. I think that my mother's biological mother, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that she was very, very mean to me. And I realize I understand that now it's because I was feminine. Um, because she wasn't mean to my brother. She wasn't mean to my male cousins. She was mean to my female cousins. She was mean to me. I think she totally understood that if without her being equipped with the terminology, the language, I think she definitely understood that I was either gay or, I was feminine and she didn't like that. Um, the person I grew up calling my grandmother, I don't think that she ever understood that. Um, my grandfather, on the other hand, he and I shared a bond. I'm not sure if he understood why, but he and I shared a bond that because he was my hero, he was my model. I could look at him and say, to be perfectly blunt, it's okay to have a penis and want to do this feminine thing.
Yes.
Okay, because look, this person does it. And not only they do it well. They're very successful at doing this. So it was okay. So I think if he didn't understand why, I think that bond was based in that.
Yes. And I'm curious going along with that as well. I know that you mentioned that your grandparents went to church together. Was your family religious growing up?
No, not at all. Not at all. Um, my grandparents, all I know about my grandparents is that they would never, they would go to a church for a little while and then they would switch churches. And I know that in their lives, they identified as Baptist, Methodist, Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, and I'm not sure. I wish that I had been able to ask these questions when they were still alive. I'm not sure I would have gotten good answers though. But knowing who they were, I think that they I think that they lived with a certain level of shame for who they were. And I think that through religion, for one, in their world, in their generation, being religious was akin to piety, morality, um, ethicality. Um, and I think that maybe they tried to throw some heat off by attending church. I'm not sure that there was any, I don't think that there was any more faith or religious mindset than what I have. Um, and I'm a very non-religious person. I think that in their community, for one, they had to, it helped them maintain a certain level of anonymity in who they were, in their sexuality or their gender identity. It helped them, it helped them in that way. But I think also it gave them a community that they didn't have because because they identified as gay people, um, in a very small community. I think that they didn't have access to a lot of other gay people, so it gave them neighbor it gave them neighbors, it gave them friends that they may not have had outside of that church, because in a small community like that in the mid to late 20th century, you just didn't hang out with the gay people down the street. It just didn't happen. So I don't think that they were even so religious as that's where they found a community that they could be a part of.
How did the community respond to their presence in the church? Were they actively welcomed in? I was curious how they found a place there.
You know, I couldn't answer that. I did not know. I did not know them in that space. I only know that, the way they spoke about that community, about that group of friends, and they seemed pretty accepted. Um, I know, I know that, like I said, they went from religion to religion. You know, all Christian based religions, but definitely with different outlooks on that faith. So I'm not sure I could answer that question. Honestly, I never had that conversation with them. I know that at the end of my grandfather's life, he went dancing every Saturday with the girls from church. That was the thing. They went dancing every Saturday evening.
That sounds wonderful. And I was really curious. I wanted to make sure to recognize them in the interview. What were the names of your grandparents?
Okay, so my grandfather was Dale, and my grandmother was Opal, and then my mother's biological mother is Susie.
Wonderful. And and going along with that, I wanted to ask, did you attend any education beyond high school moving forward in your life?
I did. I actually just earned my master's from Ball State in 2019.
Congratulations.
So yes, I have a master's in sociology.
Did you attend your undergraduate education at Ball State?
I did. I did. Well, I actually, so my education, 8 years ago, I was working in a gas station and I was dating someone, and we were actually breaking up. And she called me one day and she said, we don't need to have a conversation, but I need you to know that job is mind numbing and you're bigger than that. That job is going to kill you. And it took me about 8 or 9 months of having that in my mind And I was working one day. I'm sure I was waiting on a customer, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And at that point in my life, I had gotten my GED in the Army, and then my relationship with the Army was not what I expected, and I actually went AWOL, um, and I sued the Army. I won, but because I left, I had earned my GED while I was in the Army. I left high school early. Long story. I moved around a lot the last couple of years of high school and ended up being way behind. And they were telling me that I wasn't going to graduate high school till I was 20 or 21. And I wasn't ready to do that. um, I had sort of a rough childhood, and I needed to be away from home for my own mental health. I needed to be away from my mom's house. It wasn't a healthy place to be. So I joined the Army. Um, and I joined right. I actually enlisted 3 days after Operation Desert Storm.
Yes.
So I never served in Desert Storm because I couldn't go to basic training until after my junior year of high school. Um, but I joined. They helped me get my GED. But then when I left, everything I had done in the Army, they took from me. So I didn't have a GED anymore. I had, and I at that point I was in my 20s, and I really I just didn't pursue education. I got married, I had children, I ran my own business for about 15 years. And then when my ex-wife and I split up, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then we come to the point where I was dating this individual or breaking up with this person that I'd been dating for a few months. And she told me that, you need to do something other than what you're doing. And so like I said, it was 8 months later, I decided, okay, that was probably just a couple days before Thanksgiving that year. December 3rd, I started getting my GED. Before Christmas, I had my GED. I was enrolled at IB Tech for the spring semester. 2 weeks later, I got my associate's degree. I went immediately, got my associate's degree, went directly to Ball State, um, got my bachelor's degree in sociology and history. I never put that in there, but sociology and history, and immediately went to get my master's. So it was about 5.5 years it took me to get through it all, but I didn't waste time. As soon as I decided it was going to happen, I made it happen. And that's what brings me here today.
That's wonderful. And I'm really curious to go along with that. I know you mentioned that you were part of the Army. Would you mind sharing more about your experiences?
Well, my experience in the Army was fairly short. I went to basic training. Um, Immediately after basic training, I came home. I had 2 weeks home. The day before I was supposed to report for duty, I was dating a girl, my high school sweetheart, and we decided to go for a walk. Um, 3 blocks later, in about 15 minutes, and I had somebody viciously attack me and beat me in the face with a pool ball, a cue ball from a pool table, and sort of rearranged my face in a very literal sense. It wasn't just beating, they like moved my nose and crushed eye sockets, my upper palate, crushed my skull. So I spent the better part of the next year uh, recovering from that. I got done recovering and I went to my advanced training. But while I was in advanced training, they were talking about these other surgeries that I needed. And I'm sure I became way too expensive for the Army, and I started being heavily restricted in what I could do. And that's why I went AWOL, because they were keeping me from doing things that I had signed up. If I'm not going to be able to do these things, then this isn't what I signed up for. So I went AWOL, and it sounds horrible. I went AWOL. I had already completed my training, and I was waiting on a permanent duty station. The doctor that was treating me, though, was from the University of Connecticut, and he would only treat me at Ball Hospital. He would only treat me in another university-sponsored healthcare facility. So, and he was the only one that could do the surgeries I needed. At the time, he was the only person in the United States that could do the surgeries that I needed. So the Army was not putting me in a permanent duty station, and I was stationed at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis. And I was trying to go overseas. I wanted to go to Europe. The war was over. I still wanted to serve, and I was young. I wanted to see the world, and they wouldn't send me. They were basically told me that I wasn't going to go. And so I left work one day, and I came home, and within 4 hours, I contacted an adjutant and started faxing them paperwork. This is the early 90s, so I had to go to a facility that just did faxing. And I faxed them all the paperwork that they needed. And it was about a month later, I was discharged with it was just a general discharge. But I gave up so much. I gave up everything I had done while I was there. And I won the contract was for $12,000. They paid me a little over $7,000. And then when I went to seek out the rest of my money, they were like, well, yeah, we'll give you the rest of their money if you want to go do some time in Leavenworth for going AWOL. And I was like, oh, I guess I didn't read that part. No, I'd rather not go to prison for this. I felt pretty powerless because I didn't choose to be attacked. I didn't choose for any of that to happen. I did my best to avoid it happening when it did happen. So that was my Army experience. I wouldn't have traded basic training because, I grew up in a pretty rough household. And I didn't know how to be an adult in any way. My mother's version of being an adult was just if she went to work every day, that was adulting. And while it certainly is, there's so much more involved, and you and I understand that, but I'm not so sure that my mom still doesn't fully understand that. So I learned how to be an adult through the Army. It was the only way that I learned that I had to take care of these certain things to be a productive member of society. I think had I not been in the Army, I may have been in prison, to be quite honest with you. I spent a large part of high school experimenting with drugs and alcohol and doing some things that most people probably don't experience or even know exist until they're, well into adulthood. I had already experienced before high school. So I think that by the time I was out of the Army, though, I've not spent any of my adult life addicted to drugs or alcohol or committing crimes, or outside of maybe, in the 90s, a seatbelt violation or something. But I've never, and I raised, I raised 4 of my 5 children. I didn't raise all 5 of them. I raised 4 of my 5 children, but all 5 of my children have college degrees and are fairly productive members of society. I have a 23-year-old that sometimes video games are more important than anything else. But he's not married. He doesn't have any responsibilities aside from himself and me. He takes care of me.
Yes. Thank you for sharing more about your experience. And I know that you mentioned the attack that had a big impact on your life and your experience in the Army. Would you mind sharing more about that? Did you know who the attacker was?
I've never seen him before in my life. I Okay, so and unfortunately I've still smoked cigarettes. I've smoked my entire life, and to be honest, I've smoked since I was 5 years old. So that's where that whole experience, the whole attack happened. The girl I was dating, I knew I had to leave Muncie at 4 in the morning to be on post by 5. And this was about 10 o'clock at night. And I looked at her and I said, why don't we take a walk, get a pack of cigarettes, and then we'll come home, and I need to get a few hours sleep before I have to drive to Indianapolis. I lived in the middle of a block, like right in the very center house of this block. And it was a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with. My mom had moved while I was in basic training, so it wasn't even a neighborhood I was familiar with at all. We left, we got to the end of the block, and I hear there was somebody screaming. But I didn't know anyone in the neighborhood, so I was just ignored it. They're not screaming at me. And then I hear somebody yell, hey, hey. So I was like, okay, and who are they yelling at? And I looked over my shoulder, and I'm going to use the language. I hope I don't offend you, but we're both adults. I'm going to use the language that
Yes.
was used. I look to my right, and there's two guys sitting on this lawn, like on this hill in this lawn. And the one looked at me and said, did you fucking hear what he said to you? And I said, I don't fucking care what he said to me. I don't know him. And in my mind, in my head, I'm thinking, I don't know you, so I don't care. And I said, I don't fucking care. And I kept walking. I got to the end of the next block and looked over my shoulder, and these two guys were behind me. Well, at the end of the block, there was a main street, and there was an arcade, / pool hall. And it was a place that when I was in high school that I visited pretty often. My friends and I would go in there a lot. Um, so I tell my girlfriend, I said, why don't we go over here? I'm going to know some people. We might be able to they won't, they're going to leave us alone. So I walked in. The place was packed. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone. In the back of the pool hall was this little room where some of the older men in the neighborhood got together and did some illegal gambling. And I thought, okay, so we'll walk back here. I walked back there. I knew all the old men, but they weren't really going to help me. So we turned around and we went to walk back out. And as we went to walk back through the front, these two guys came through the door. And as soon as they came through the door, almost everybody in the place was like, oh, hey, they knew them. And I was like, oh my God. They went to one side of the pool hall and were talking with some people. So I told my girlfriend, I said, hey, we're going to go over here. We're going to go towards the door. They're with their friends now. Maybe they'll leave us alone. So as we approached, the pool tables were stacked end to end. There was 4 pool tables were the length of the building. And we made it to the end of the final pool table before we got to the front door. And this person was just in front of me. He was just there. And like I said, I'm 5'3". He was about 5'10", and he probably weighed 240 pounds. He was this great big guy. And I kind of looked at him and I thought to myself, if I hit this guy, I got to hit this guy hard because he's way bigger. I have to put him on the ground to get away from it. And I went to take a step back. And as I did, the edge of my pants, the seam from my jeans, got caught on a little tiny tack on the side of the pool table. And I dropped my eyes from his eyes to my pant leg to swipe my pants away from that. And that's the last thing I remember. He had picked up a cue ball and hit me in the face. Knocked me back about 30 feet. I landed. I jumped up and I started swinging just wildly because I was seeing 6, 8 of everything. I was bleeding profusely and I started swinging and everybody was telling me, sit down, sit down. And I wasn't going to sit down. I didn't know I was out of danger at that point. So I'm swinging and I stumble up to the front window and it was an old building, like cigarette style building, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Long, narrow building where you can see all the way through. So I stumbled up to the front window and I look out and I see the owner of the pool hall chasing this guy across the street, beating him with the pool cue in the back of the head. And I turned around, and about the time I turned around, I'm bleeding. And the girl I was dating noticed I was bleeding and she started to faint. And I ran over and I caught her and I picked her up and I was holding my face so I didn't bleed on her. And I carried her to the back room and I sat her in a chair. I was in shock, obviously, at this point. I went into the restroom and I grabbed a handful of paper towels and I held them up to my face. And I grabbed another handful of paper towels and I started cleaning the floor. And everybody's screaming at me to sit down. And I was like, no, Jimmy was the owner. And I was like, no, Jimmy is going to be mad if I don't clean it. I'm bleeding all over his place. I need to clean this up. And they finally got me, sitting. And, someone had called 911. And the first person on the scene was a county policeman. And I realize now that he was really just trying to save my life. But at the time, he was trying to get me into a police car. And I was like, no, I didn't do it.
Yes.
I got attacked. I'm a victim. And it took them about 15 minutes to get me in his car. And the only way I would get in his car is if he let me sit in the front seat and the doors remained unlocked. Because I told him, if I think you're going downtown, I'm getting out. I didn't do anything wrong. And he took me to Ball Hospital. And I was at Ball for about 3 hours. I had some bleeding on my brain. And because I was in the Army, Ball wouldn't help me. They told the girl I was dating, oh, well, go ahead and take him home. And it was him at the time. So take him home. If he stops breathing, call us. Call 911.
Oh my goodness.
So that was basically my experience. After that, I walked around with my head about 3 sizes bigger than it should be. My nose was turned sideways and kind of pointing up. I literally had to wear a hat in the rain or water would get in my nasal passages. And it took me about a year before the swelling went down enough that they could operate. When they did operate, I don't even know what the procedure is at this point. I know that I have a silicone membrane that because I have bones that float around in my face because it was so damaged that they couldn't. It wasn't just a matter of the bone healing because it will never heal. They got both of my eye sockets here, my upper palate, my cheekbones, my nose, the bone at the end of before the cartilage got crushed. So they kind of put everything back in its general space, and it's all kind of held together with this silicone membrane. Now, that's the best I can explain it. For one, I'm not a physician, and for another, it happened almost 30 years ago.
Yes. Thank you. And going along with that, I know you mentioned that you ran a business after the Army. Would you mind sharing more about that as well?
Um, oh yeah, certainly. After the Army, I managed a couple restaurants and worked in a couple factories. And the last factory job I had a supervisor that was just not a good person. He was a great big guy, probably about 6'5", probably weighed close to 400 pounds. I've described my size to you. And right now I'm kind of heavy because I've had some health issues, but typically I weigh between 150 and 160 pounds. And this man would stand over top of me and scream until his face turned red and spit in my face. It, and it, I got to the point where I would get so nervous before work that I would have to throw up or I couldn't go. I'd have to make sure my stomach was empty because I would be so nervous while I was there. And I went to go to work one day and, opened my car door, vomited in my driveway, closed the door, sat there for a moment, repeated the process. And I only lived about 5 minutes from where I worked. And I looked at the clock and I was like, oh, I'm late now. So now I'm going to be in trouble when I get there. I was 20, 25 and no, 20, 23. I'm sorry. But I shut my car off. I got out of the car and walked in back into the house and looked at my wife. I said, I can't go there. I can't go there again. I spent the next 2 weeks, wondering what I was going to do. I didn't even have a GED to get another job. And although that was the only job that I wasn't in some sort of managerial position. So I wasn't used to taking those kind of orders or that kind of, I don't know, I wasn't used to being in that position. I've always been in some kind of management or supervisory type position. So it was about 2 weeks later, I was watching television and I, there was an infomercial on, or I don't remember exactly what it was, but someone mentioned getting government contracts to do work. And I went, I can do that. I can definitely do that. And talked to my wife the next day and I said, hey, I'm gonna seek out these government contracts. And this was this was towards the mid to late 90s. And so I was able to go on the internet, find some government contracts that were available. We were able to start obtaining those contracts. And then, from there, doing the kinds of work that I was doing for the government, I was able to put myself in the private sector as well and advertise that I was available to do this kind of work. A lot of it was demolition work, construction, hauling, hauling. Um, so yeah, that's what I did. I said 15 years. She and I split up. The business actually existed for 15 years. I was only a part of it for about 12. And then when my wife and I split up, I just kind of turned everything over to her because she had my children and she needed the money, way more than I did. And I walked away and just kind of became homeless for a little while. So
And I'm curious, I know you mentioned that you lived in Muncie. Did you come to Muncie in your young age? Was it a specific point in your life that you came to this area?
moved to Muncie I moved to Muncie when I was 16 because my mom my mom got transferred here. So that's what brought me to Muncie. I left when I was 20 and I didn't come back until I was 36. So I lived in surrounding counties, mostly in Jay County. That's where I raised my kids anyway.
And I'm curious, what brought you back to the Muncie area? Was it schooling at Ball State?
No, it was the fact that I was homeless. And the only support system that I did have were my mom and my brother, and they both lived in Muncie. So that's what brought me back here. Plus, I I love this place. I think as Americans, maybe not even as Americans, I think so many of us overlook the place where we live. And I just love this place. We have, for the size of the community we have so much going on, mostly because we do have a university, but largely we have this great group of people that, though definitely we are as flawed as any other Indiana community, we have big socioeconomic differences, lots of racism. But I've also found that within those differences, there's greatness in these people that live here. I know people that are extremely racist and even homophobic. But if I am in need, those people will help me. They might tell me, "Oh, I don't approve of who you are, but I'm not going to let you starve. I'm not going to let you go without. I don't have to approve of who you are to want you to strive." I think had I been homeless in any other place, I would probably still be homeless. I think it was being part of this community that helped me get to where I am today. So that's what keeps me here. I really, I, I look for opportunities in other places. There's other parts of the country that I've lived in, that I've visited, that I absolutely adore, and I think it would be really great to live there. But at the end of the day, if I just take a description of where I live and who I am as a person, this place is almost perfect for me. We've got a nice mid-sized university. We've got museums, great hiking and walking, biking trails, good people, lots of really socially minded organizations, and the people that are backing those organizations. And my kids are here. Four or five of my children live in the city, so I love it here. And I don't know. I think I'll always come back here.
That's wonderful. And going along with that, I was really curious to ask you, how do you identify in the city of Muncie? I know you introduced yourself and identified that you identify as transgender. Would you mind sharing more about your identity?
Um, it's so many people here. The name my parents gave me is Paul. Okay. So when I was a child, and I'm not going to pretend to know or guess your age, but when I was a child, there was a television show called Family on in the 1970s. And there was an actress, young Christy McNichol, played a character. And the character's name was Letitia, but the family called her Buddy. When I was young, my mother always called me Buddy. And I remember being about 4 years old and identifying so much with, not because her name was Buddy, but because she was a female. and she did these things like riding bikes, and she was kind of a tomboy. And I was like, that makes sense. Her name's Buddy. My name's Buddy. So that, and then, the fact that my family was always really, I majored in high school in at the time we could do this, I majored in home economics. There was only one other male that majored in home economics. And he was only there because that's where all the girls were. And so then I grew up in this community, I've being, even though I didn't live in Muncie or even in Delaware County, I coached football for a little while, a junior league here in Muncie. A lot of people know me. And a lot of people know me as Buddy. And I'll try to explain to you the way I think about this, okay? They know me as Buddy with a Y. And I intentionally changed the Y to IE to create that separation. But I think because I've always been who I am, that I never had to hide these feminine aspects of myself. I think that being a member of this community, I see so many people that I'm not even sure they realize I'm wearing makeup. And I had always felt this level of acceptance in my own family. So, I coached football for several years, like 8 years, I coached football. But I don't think that most people don't see me any differently, which is great. I have several transgender friends that have some major dysphoria. And while I do experience some dysphoria, certainly I do, I don't think I have to deal with it on the same level. Not that it's any less or greater. It's just different because, and I often say this, the only thing that really changes, I have better clothes. I have a better wardrobe. I'm still the same person. I wasn't closeted in a way that I really had to deny all these feminine aspects of who I am. Now, I will say that I did most of my life try to overcompensate with my masculinity. I mean, I joined the Army, I played football, I did construction. And I'm not bragging, but I once lifted a house off of a person. And I did those things to prove that I was a boy. I was a tough person. But I don't think that I ever had to be so closeted that all these feminine things about me were hidden. When I did come out to my family, specifically my mother, she looked at me and said, well, yeah. And she was like, it just makes sense. And, she had this list of reasons, which all of them didn't make sense. And at one point I had to say, no, it's not because of you. You didn't do this. I am me because I'm me.
Yes.
But some of her things that she listed, I don't understand how she didn't come to me as a younger person and say, do we need to have this discussion? I know as me being a parent, I would probably go talk to my kids and say, hey, do we need to have a conversation? How can I help you? But, my mother grew up in a different time. And I think she grew up with transgender or gay parents in a time that was shameful. And I'm gonna be really candid. The one thing that I had an issue with in any of my relationships that I still maintain was about 4 months before I came out to my mom. I was sitting in her home and being transgender or transgender topics came up a lot. I kept them active in my house. Even though I wasn't out, I would bring in these transgender topics and have conversations often. Um, I think I was trying to get somebody most of my life to say, are you transgender? So I could say, yes, yes, I am. But my mom, my stepfather, and myself were having a conversation. This is August of 2018. And I don't even remember the topic, how the topic was brought up or what it was about. But my mom looked at me and said, all transgender people are pedophiles. And I went, what? We got into a bit of an argument. And I looked at her and I said, I have to leave. I have to leave here now. And what? When I went to college, I worked with kids. I worked really closely with disadvantaged children. And that statement from my mom, I can't work with kids today. I can't, because no one can ever say that I hurt a child. I love kids too much. And I would never, ever harm a child that way. And I'm not sure my mom knows what she did to me that day because I worked so hard. I wanted to work with kids. I wanted to, when I was in college, my main thing was I worked with impoverished children, children that were suffering from generational poverty. And I grew up in generational poverty. And my main thing was these kids have to understand that what they feel is important, that they need to be validated for their emotions, and that it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be sad. And I developed a program that the organization that I work with still use, but it was a self-actualization program through poetry. And it was poetry projects that were designed for children as soon as they could write. They could participate in these poetry exercises that would help them. For one, it was really big self-esteem boosters, but it was also this way it was a relief valve. Because I know when I was 5 years old and my mother told me that I couldn't have X item, whatever item that might be, but all of my friends did, that hurt me. That hurt me. And I think so many children are said, well, you don't need these things to be validated, but that's not how we feel. As adults, we know, okay, you don't have to have the newest PlayStation to be a good person. But when we're 5 years old and everybody else has the greatest, newest, latest fad, and you don't, it hurts you. I don't care who you are, it hurts you. And when my mom told me that day that all transgender people are pedophiles, I thought other people must think this, so I can't ever work with children now. And it kind of, I have a master's degree, and I did customer service immediately after college because I went to college to work with kids. And in that one instant, I can't work with kids anymore because I never want to be accused of that. Never. I know the kids that I did work with, the children I worked with when I was in college, I'm still in contact with all their parents. I've never had any one of them ever say, this thing. And I'm fairly open with who I am. I'm not hiding the fact that I'm transgender or I'm living this life. I did that for too long to hide it. But those people know me, and they know that I love those kids. I don't ever want anyone to be introduced to me and go, "Oh, this transgender person," because then they're going to be looking. They're going to be looking for that one thing. Why did Buddy take Jimmy for a walk? Well, because Jimmy needed to cry and didn't want his mom to know why he was crying. But that's going to be always going to be thrown into question. And I never want that to happen. I never want a kid to have to look at me and go, no, that person didn't do this, or this to me. No, I don't want to put that child in that situation. And I definitely don't want to put myself in a situation where I have to defend my actions when my actions are just out of love because I was a poor kid, because I was bullied and picked on because of who I was. That's my whole thing. Kids need to be validated. They need to understand that their emotions are important, if only to them. They're still important.
Yes.
And so many, especially in generational poverty, their parents aren't equipped to teach them how to deal with those things. So I went to college to do that, and now I can't. So
I'm so sorry.
that's okay. Thank you, though. Sometimes I just need to get that out to
I'm glad
someone
you
that's
said it.
someone that's not my family. Um, my partner that's just sitting across the room is really great about hearing some of these things out, but she's my partner, so she's gonna try to validate me. It's good to talk to someone about it that doesn't have any stake in validating me.
Yes.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And I'm curious, as somebody who is part of the Muncie community and does great work in this community, I was curious, would you mind sharing more about your experience in Muncie as a transgender individual?
I came out in 2018, October of 2018, and I was still finishing up my master's program. And I don't know if you know Melinda Messinio.
Yes, yes.
Love Dr. Messinio. She is I cherish her. She was the first person to use the proper pronouns, and it was just felt nice. Um, Still a very close friend and colleague. We haven't talked since Christmas, but she's still a really close friend and colleague. Um, and then, being in a sociology program, most of us are like-minded, and everyone that in my cohort was really supportive and are still really supportive. I talk to them almost every day. Um, so that was really great. I have some people, I'm not necessarily close with them, but I have some people in my life, in my neighborhood, that are really validating. I have a corner store that I visit quite often, and the ladies that work there do not let people mess with me. They've they've came around the counter a few times and had thrown people out of their store. Um, the latest one was, "Why are you looking at her butt? She doesn't like boys." Um, so those people are great. I came out in October of 2018, and then less than a year and a half later, we've been in at home. So I spent half of my time being out, locked in my house. We're doing Zoom meetings. I've only had one really negative experience, and surprisingly, it was on campus. Um, and it was just about 3 months after I came out. It was in January of 19, and I came out of North Quad. Was getting ready to cross university to go through the student center because I was parked out in that other country wherever people park so they don't have to pay. Um, and as I was crossing the street, or I waited, I had a purse and my briefcase and a backpack, and I've been loaded down for a day on campus. And I waited for this car to pass. The car passed. I crossed the street. I got to that center median, and this person slammed on their brakes, got out of their car, and I was faggot this and faggot that. And I just dropped everything and I started moving towards the person. I said, "Don't you ever forget, I used to be a man." I was going after them, um, which may not have been the smartest move. They got in their car and drove away. I picked up my things and I went through the student center and I was shaken up. I got to the end of the little boulevard there at the parking garage, and here came that car. He had circled the block, and I was a little scared. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Didn't mess with me anymore, but that was really my only negative experience. Um, and I've talked to other trans people in Muncie since the pandemic. We love masks because it hides some things that identify us as our biological sex. So the mask is perfect because I get more mans and doors held open for me, and um, you know, um, my partner and I, it's always ladies, and um, I said the masks are great. I hope it never goes away. No,
I
that's
think
that's
they'll
not
be
true.
with us for a long time.
They are going to be with us for a long time, but I do hope that we can get back to some form of normalcy sometime.
I hope so too. And going along with that, I was really curious. I know you mentioned the professor and pronoun changes. Would you mind sharing more about what that looked like when you first came out? Were most people adopting them very quickly?
Um, I think that professionally, it's not really been much of an issue. Um, I work for an international corporation, and they're very accommodating. Um, so that's not, the last year's been really great. The company I worked for before that is it's a national company, but they're headquartered here locally. And I'm going to maintain some professionalism and not call them out.
Yes.
But they were, for lack of a better word, they were pretty horrible to me. Um, I had a coworker without giving any direct quotes, the coworker basically said that gay and transgender people deserve what they get. And I asked for clarification, and he basically said that if they get killed, they should maintain being in the closet or they wouldn't get killed.
Oh my goodness.
Just one moment. Can you give me a moment? I'm gonna have to plug in. We've been on the
Sure.
I've been on the computer for a couple hours and we've been on for an hour and a half. So I'm gonna bring in my cord. Thank you, Chris. But in that, of course, and him saying that, because I was angry, and I looked at the person and I said, you do realize that people die just to be themselves, just to be happy. We put ourselves in danger to be happy. And I went to human resources, which was probably not my best move. I went to human resources. Within 30 minutes, they brought 7 people into the room, different people, and made me recount my story. So I had to, and I wasn't completely open to everyone. They made me come out to 7 different people in 30 minutes. And did absolutely nothing to this person that said I should be dead. Nothing. They actually suggested, well, why don't you choose another office? And I went, no, I didn't do anything. I did nothing. It's not going to be punitive on me.
Yes.
And I refused. And that person actually moved voluntarily and threw a fit about it like a 2-year-old. Well, I guess I'll just move over here and sit by myself so no one can accuse me of anything. I didn't accuse you of anything. I quoted you. I didn't say you did this and you didn't do it. I just quoted you. You said that gay and transgender people should be dead. We deserve to die. That's all I said. So that was not good. I'm having some issues with my mother has got a disease it's taking her life.
I'm so sorry.
And I have to keep some distance because, for example, I saw my mom for about 15 minutes yesterday. And within that 15 minutes, it was him, he, him, he. And the whole time her telling me how much she loves me. And I'm just like, you don't understand how much that hurts, though. You don't get it. So I'm having some issues there. I do have a breakthrough. My sons will purposely use they and them. I'm not sure they're comfortable with she and her, but they will intentionally use they and them. And I can live with that. I can live with that. Other than, those are my experiences. Those are the groups of people that I speak to the most, that are in my life the most. So, most of my colleagues are really, really nice. The team that I'm working on now, my immediate supervisor is also transgender. And as soon as I started working with her, she was like, okay, so we need to get some things changed here because your name's Buddy and everything I'm looking at says Paul. See, I was supposed to get my name changed last year and then the pandemic hit.
Oh, yes.
So I wasn't able to do any of that after the pandemic hit, and I haven't started working on it again this year. So everything legally has to say Paul. And my first thing, my supervisor was like, hold on, your Buddy. We're going to make sure that everyone knows your Buddy. We're going to get it changed in every place that we can get it changed. And she did. And to be quite honest,
outside of work, I probably would not like the person. We have a personality clash. And that happens that, we all have people that we're just not going to get along with, or we're not going to necessarily like. Um, but I have a lot of respect for her because she has, she's helped me in that way. She's very validating, even if I don't like her. Well, and maybe you'll understand this. I have a lot of friends that I don't like. They've never done anything to me. They're great people. We just can't go bowling together.
Yes, I completely understand.
So, yeah, I think that for the most part, I don't have any issues. I have some issues with my immediate family, which I expect to probably always have those issues. Like I said, my mom has a terminal disease, and I'm not sure she's going to die calling me she and her.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I try not to think about it too much, and I think she tries not to think about it too much. But I think I'll always be her little boy. It hurts me to, I don't know that it hurts so much as at this point, it's really frustrating to hear he and him. But if that's what my mom needs at this point for peace, I'm going to let her have it. I may not be as involved in her life because of it, but I love my mother very much. And if that's what she needs, then she'll call me he and him, and I'll just have to live with it, I guess, because
That's very kind of you.
we're not going to have much time to make that change, unfortunately.
Well, whether or not she knows it, you are a very, very wonderful daughter to her.
Thank you. That's the first time anyone's ever called me her daughter. I have a sister. She was my stepsister, and we didn't see her for many years. And about a year Christmas of 2019, she got back in contact with us. My mother called me one day and she said, we had this conversation. She said, "You know what, buddy? I finally have my daughter." And I had to get off the phone.
Yeah.
It's like, what am I? Who am I? And I get it. I'm her oldest son. I'm her oldest child. So I don't know. Those things are rough. I think that, I haven't really spoken to you much about my brother. My brother tried to be really validating at first. But my brother and I used to be really close. But my brother started saying things to me like, "I just don't understand. You're such a good looking guy." Well, it has nothing to do. For one, you're confusing my gender identity with my sexuality. I don't like boys. The only boys I like, and I say this a lot, the only boys I really like have my last name. They're my sons. They're my family. Because most males, I have some really good colleagues, and I won't name them, but they're really great guys. I adore them. I don't want to date them. That's not who I am. I like feminine people. That's who I'm attracted to, are feminine people. So when my brother started saying things like that, there became tense. And then he started trying to attack me in other ways that my brother never had. I think he knew better than to stay away from my gender identity, so he attacked other things. And in light of that, my brother and I have not spoken for about 20 months. I'm not sure we're going to for a while, unless my mom's health changes and, for the worst or something, and he and I are forced to. We probably won't talk for a little while.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, thank you. It's perfectly all right. I think that I'm having some issues. I'm having some issues with forgiving him because he doesn't understand that he was wrong. And it was an argument. I was wrong too, and I've admitted I was wrong. He doesn't understand that he was wrong, so I can't forgive him until he understands he's wrong. And it has nothing to do with my gender. It has to do with him attacking me in other ways. And I was just like, you obviously don't have any respect for who I am or what I've done in my life. Because my brother's lived this very stereotypical heteronormative life. When we were young, he got his high school diploma. He went from high school to a factory. When the factories closed in the 90s, he became a policeman. He worked as a policeman for 12 years, and now he is in local government. He's not a policeman anymore, but he still is he's in municipal service. We'll say it that way. He owns a home, 2 cars, 2.5 children, the entire, nuclear family thing that, although I've married and had children, I've never lived that life. That's never been who I am. I think my mother used to describe me as the artistic one, and my brother was the serious one. So I guess I've led an artistic life. I don't know what that means, but
And I'm curious along those lines, would you mind sharing more about the trans community in Muncie? How did you connect with other people?
and I will actually do some name dropping at this point. So there was a group, there is a group, and now I am sort of the manager of this group. I don't know what else to call it. But it's the East Central Indiana Transgender Alliance. You can find us on Facebook. If you communicate with us on Facebook, you'll really just be communicating with me. But the second semester of my master's program, I took a course with Dr. Sarah Collis. Do you know Sarah?
Yes.
I love her. And it was the main topic was feminism. I also took another course right around the same time about what it means to be masculine. And I took the course on what it means to be masculine. And that was actually, it was just like it was part of a course where it was just sociology topics. So we would go from topic to topic, and we spoke about what it means to be masculine. And it, that course really, like, I was able to think about who I am and how I'm going to live this transgender life. At the time, I wasn't open. I don't like the term being out of the closet. I really don't like some of the terminology
Yes.
because I never felt like I was in a closet. I didn't openly discuss certain parts of who I am. That was all. I just didn't openly discuss it. There were a few people throughout my life that I had shared that with, and that was fine. Those people knew. And um, but then I took this class with Dr. Collis, and Dr. Collis is obviously a very masculine person. And one of the first things that she started talking about was um, how a lot of people in the feminist movement and in the lesbian community are very not accepting of transgender, male to female transgender people. And that many of them think that we're um, invading women's spaces. So I had this idea of, like these changing views of masculinity, coupled with these things that, these women that I adore. Most of my friends, my adult friends, have always been lesbian women. And I was like, I hope they never thought that I was trying to invade their space. I always felt really accepted. But I left those with those two courses, and I was in this really kind of like horrible relationship with this person. And like I told her, and that's when she decided she was going to use it against me. We spoke about that earlier. So all that happened, and at the same time, I met Morgan Roddy.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love Morgan and Sherry. I knew Morgan, and Morgan had introduced me to some people, and without saying, without being open about my own identity, I started volunteering for different things and just kind of putting myself in the community. And ECIT, the Central Indiana Transgender Alliance, ECITA, we do a clothing giveaway. It's a trans affirmative clothing giveaway. We didn't get to do it in the fall because of the pandemic, but we do it every year at the YWCA, and I volunteered. And it was after I volunteered that the person that I was dating at the time started trying to use my identity against me. And so by the time we actually did the event, the first event that I was involved in, I was just kind of like open. And I'd had this experience with my mother telling me that all transgender people are pedophiles. And I needed an outlet because I love to help people. I think that you'll find that most people, at least at Ball State, in my experience, most people that are in the sociology program were there because we love to help people. We love people. And I did that first clothing giveaway, which would have been 3 years ago, and was totally just overjoyed to see these young people coming in and going, do these boxers look good on me? Or, the 20-something-year-old that would come in and go, thank you for giving me this place where I can find a bra without being stared at, without being judged, that I can ask you if there's a place for me to change and you're not going to look at me and go, women's or men's. And I was like, this is kind of my thing. This is what I want to do. And so, Morgan and Sherry, and I don't know if you know any of the other people involved in the community in Muncie, but Laura Janney, Laura?
Yes.
I love Laura to death. But they were all really great. They are all really supportive. They are those three people specifically are people that somehow innately know when I need to be applauded, and I'll get the random, hey, I just want you to know I love you. And I think that the LGBTQ community in Muncie at large is a really great community. I think that we have a unique space being in a community this size. We're just small enough to be a small town, but we're just big enough to have a really good sized community of really supportive people. So yeah, that's my experience. I love the people here in our community. At this point, it's obviously not benefiting my career in any way, but I am in a position where if a trans person needs help, this support system reaches out. Hey, can you help? Because they know that, 99% of the time I'm going to be like, sure, it's 4 a.m. I'm coming. I'm on my way. So it's given me maybe a little niche that I felt was taken through my conversation with my mother that day, because I still found this group of people, many of them young people. But it's okay for me to help them because they're queer too. And I love that term. That's a term that I will embrace, because we're all just a little queer, regardless of your sexual identity. We're all just a little queer.
Most definitely. And I was curious, I know that you are very connected with the community. What resources are available for transgender individuals in Muncie?
Okay, so in Muncie, we have some really great support groups, which I'm, because I sort of manage the East Central Indiana Transgender Alliance, which was sort of a de facto. I did it. There were a lot of people involved, and through changes in our lives. Right now, ECITA is just me. I'm it. But I maintain the group because I'm able to put people, or help people find doctors, support groups. We have some support groups for young people. Finding Spirit is a group. I do a lot more of safe space type work. There was a young transgender person working in a local restaurant that got attacked a few weeks ago. On her way home, she works the late shift and was going home early in the morning, walking, and I guess she got attacked. And the first thing is we need to find this person a safe way to travel. And I'm always the first one to volunteer for that. So I'm not heavily involved with those support groups. And that part might be partially my personality. I've always been pretty independent. And when I get into a support group, I don't always feel I have a place. But I know that there are some really great groups. I know there's Finding Spirit. My oh my, without looking it up, I'm not sure of the names of the other 2 or 3 support groups I know of. But I do have a lot of information about Eskenazi Center, getting people some medical treatment, um, mental health treatment if they need it. And I can put people in contact with local healthcare providers that are trans friendly. That's largely been my experience in the community. My main thing is my main goal is to provide these safe spaces where people can be themselves, mainly shopping, clothing, because of what we project. When I look in the mirror, I want to see the way I think of myself. And so many of us don't get that outlet. So that's my main concern. And once this whole pandemic is over, I'm considering some options for opening some sort of, I've not got the details. We're going to say a nonprofit boutique. So I'm not sure how that's going to work out. I've had some discussions with some people. I know who I can put you in contact with to find out information. If I
That would
don't
be
know
wonderful.
so I may not know the answers to the questions. I may not always have the information, but I can find the information. And if you have questions about what is available, and you know Laura Janney or Morgan Roddy, contact either one of those two people. They know what's available and what's not. I know I worked with, I don't remember the group on campus.
Spectrum?
Oh, yes, Spectrum. There we go. So we did the Trans Day of Remembrance this year. And so I worked a little bit with Spectrum on that project. And I can only hope that they will include me in next year's TDOR because that means a lot to me. I know that as a transgender person, there's so much about myself, about my life that's probably not stereotypical to most other transgender people's experience. For one, I'm pretty bold, and I'll just, I've never done that before, but let's do it. Let's just try it out and see what happens. I do have a really great partner that's really supportive of me at this point. And, walking into the mall and going to the women's section doesn't bother me at all. I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask to use the changing room when it's available again. And I know that there are a lot of young transgender people in Muncie that aren't having that experience. That, I have a good job, I make a good living, I work for a company that's really supportive and backs me in that way. So I'm maybe able to do some things that other people are, and I would love to be able to facilitate that more for them. So, I'm not sure. I don't even remember your question.
That completely answered it. And I think one of my last questions, because this has been wonderful speaking with you, was how have you seen the LGBTQ community? I know you've been in Muncie for a long period of time, change over time.
Oh my. So I remember when I first moved to Muncie and I attended Southside High School. And I was with this group of boys. And this boy started telling me this story about how he had gone gay bashing over the weekend.
Mm.
And I didn't know what that meant. I grew up in a really small town where, while I'm sure that there were some gay people that got beat up because they were gay, it wasn't an event. This person made it, they spoke about it like it was a sport. When they were throwing glass bottles at people leaving um, the Mark bar, the tap room.
Yes.
And this was it. So that would have been in 1990. Now I think that, and I think this may personify really the community and the way um, the social change over the last 30 years is that, heterosexual, homosexual, whatever it seems like. For instance, I spoke to someone from Chicago about 4 months ago. And we were talking about contact tracing, and I was trying to discern who they had been in contact with. And they start telling me, well, I went to Muncie and I went to this bar. What was it called? And they started talking about the atmosphere. And I was like, was it the tap room? And they were like, yes, that's what it was. And then they started telling me how they had gone there with their heteronormative parents to what has been, it's a gay bar. It's a gay space. And I think that in 2021, to say that these three heteronormative, at least heteronormative individuals felt comfortable to go into this gay space and socialize says way more than, it says so much about what's changed since 1990, when I was talking to an individual that was talking about throwing glass bottles at these gay people just because they were leaving a gay bar. That's the change I've seen. I think there's so many more people like myself that are just like, we're going to be who we are. And if you don't like it, then, you don't have to look at me. You don't have to live with me. You don't have to do anything with me. We don't have to go to the same church. We don't have to go to the same bar. We don't have to have the same friends. The only thing we have to do is breathe the same air, live these human lives that we're living in this really, really confusing period in history. That's the only thing we have to do, is share this time. We don't have to like each other, love each other. We don't even have to know the other person exists. We just have to share this time. That's it. That's the change. Because I know in 1990, people were afraid. In 1990, I couldn't have this conversation with you. I couldn't have. And I was very aware. 1990 was the year that I looked at the mirror and thought, I guess you're just going to be a boy the rest of your life. And in 2018, I was able to say, no, that's not who I am. And I'm tired of being that. I can't do that anymore. I'm not comfortable with that. That's the change.
Most definitely. And I wanted to thank you so much for sharing this all with me today. I really, really appreciate it so much. Was there anything that I didn't cover in the interview today that you'd like to talk about?
Um, Emma, maybe on another day. We've been here for 2 hours though, and you have been wonderful.
Yes.
It's
I was
great to
looking at
have
the
some
clock.
emotional time, but it is noon and I probably should get to some errands and some things I've got to run. I would like to stay in touch with you though. If you ever want to
Yes.
email me. Find us East Central Indiana Transgender Alliance on Facebook. Follow us. I would love to stay in touch with you. You're great. You have a wonderful smile, by the way. It's very warming, very inviting. So thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, I'll go ahead and conclude the interview. And after the fact, I can reach out about if there was anyone else you'd like me to contact about an interview as well. I wanted to, yes, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think that if you're looking for histories, I know Morgan Roddy's history just a little bit. It's a very interesting history. She's got a great history. If no one's interviewed her, I would recommend calling her.
She's the next one we're reaching out to soon.
Oh, great.
With that, I'll go ahead and conclude the interview. Thank you so much for participating in this interview and for your contribution to the Muncie LGBTQ History Project. I'll go ahead and,
I have a question.
yes.
When will this project wrap up?
Yes, here, I'll go ahead and stop recording and bring Dr. Johnson.
Okay.